You guys are lucky. This is kind of an encore presentation of one that we did earlier this week with my beautiful wife, Whitney, who is pregnant with our first child, little Lily. And those of you who don't know about Whitney and I, we actually are photographers as well. We own a studio here in Portland, Oregon, where onOne is located. And she's also the one who creates all of the beautiful album templates that are available for free on the onOne website. So if you go to the onOne website, log in, you can download tons of albums and card templates that Whitney's created that you can use for your own work. So Whitney's also joining us today over the phone. She's going to be helping answer some of the questions. So you can say hi there, honey.
Hello, hopefully you can hear me. Just so you guys have a heads up, is Bliss Studio is the name of our studio. So if you're looking for the templates, they're not actually going to say Whitney Stevens. They're going to say Bliss on them.
Yep, that's right. And please check out our website and blog. And if you have any comments for us or on our work, that's the place to put them. So today we're going to have a little bit of fun. We're going to talk about how to make these portraits stand out. And I'm working here in Lightroom. That's where I import my images and manage them. That's also where I do some of the basic color and tonal corrections first. And you notice that these images that I've selected to work on today have the little plus and minus symbol in the bottom right-hand corner. That means they've been adjusted. And if we actually were to take the first image that we're going to work on, and let's go to the develop module here for a second. I'll actually show you what I've done so far. I haven't done a whole lot. This is actually the original image out of the camera. It was a little bit cool. So all I really did is I just adjusted the white balance, boosted the contrast a little bit, and I think I added a little bit of fill light just to open up the hair a little bit. Not a big adjustment. These images were shot on a cloudy day. It was actually shot last Saturday, and it's very cloudy, very flat light. On this image, the only light that we have is just a silver light disc reflector in the foreground that's actually doing very little because it's just laying on the ground a couple of feet in front of Whitney. It was just enough to add a little bit of light into the eyes, and that was it. For some of you guys who haven't seen these before, these are the onOne panels that live inside of Lightroom. It lets you actually select an image and send it directly to Photoshop, directly to a specific module. In this case, I'm going to send it right to Photo Tools. The nice thing about this is it saves you that step of having to, once it gets into Photoshop, of sending it to Photo Tools. And when you're done working on it in Photo Tools, it saves it and closes and round trips it right back to Lightroom. It also gives you the ability to add presets to the image right off the bat. So all of your presets from Photo Tools live over here in the left column. So I could select any preset that I've created. Let's say I wanted to use one in this vintage category. When I select it, it'll show me what it looks like, gives me before and after preview, and lets me control how it's added to the image. In this case, I'm actually just going to hit the open button to send it to Photo Tools without any work done to it. It'll just take a second here for Photoshop to open up.
It might be too early for Photoshop too.
Well, hang on here. Let me just fix what I think the problem is here. Can't have Photoshop running twice. It doesn't like
Must be a Mac problem, somebody said. No, no,
Yeah.
no, no. It's 9 a.m. It's too early for us.
It's coming. It's just taking its time this morning.
Are you still doing it from straight from Lightroom?
Yep. It should be coming up any second now. There we go. All right, so here we are inside of Photo Tools. And if this is kind of your first time seeing it, let me give you just a quick tour of what things look like. At the bottom is the library. This is where all the effects live. You can find the effects a couple different ways. You can use the search field right here, where I can just type in what I'm looking for. You can also select category view, and all the effects are divided up into categories. Or you can work in keywords and just select keywords for effects you're looking for. For example, if I wanted, let's say I want one that was, kind of warm and kind of vintage, just selecting warm and vintage narrows it down to the 5 effects and presets that match those characteristics. Most people who spent some time with Photo Tools tend to work in category view, and that's what I'm going to work in today. Another tip that most people don't know is that this library at the bottom is resizable. You can grab this little handle right over here at the right, up top of the preview, and you can make that library larger or smaller depending on the size of your monitor. It's nice to make it big sometimes because it's easier to see the preview over here on the right-hand side. And as you click through different effects, you'll be able to see what they look like on an image. You can also minimize that library, make it go away altogether by pressing the None option at the top. You can also use the Command E or Control E keyboard shortcut, which will hide the library altogether, which is what I'll typically do between effects as I'm making adjustments to them. That way I can have as much real estate as possible. The other thing I want to show you is here in the middle in the preview area. By default, it's going to come up in a side-by-side before and after preview. Obviously, we haven't done anything yet, so both sides look the same. If I'm working on a vertical image, a lot of the times I'll leave it in this side-by-side compare. But if I'm working on a horizontal image, I want to use all this nice preview space. So I'm just going to change the preview mode down here at the bottom by clicking on the preview mode toggle, and it'll toggle through several different modes. There's a split screen side-by-side, there's a top and bottom compare, and a top and bottom split screen. And if I toggle it all the way to single image, I'll get just one copy of the image that just shows me the after image. All right, now let's get to work. Today we're talking about how to make your portraits pop. And there's a couple good techniques for doing that. One is pushing the color contrast further apart. So in this case, we have a very strong warm, cool dichotomy in the image. It's this warm background, warm hair, but the blue denim dress. So pushing those two colors even further apart is going to make the subject pop out. We can also go in and add more contrast to certain locations in the image, which are going to make certain parts of the image pop out more. That's really key to do things like eyes. Before we get to any of that, though, we want to do a little bit of retouching. And this is kind of the first step I would do on almost any portrait. We've already done the color correction. We've done the tonal correction. We've done that in Lightroom. Now we're going to go in and we're going to do some retouching on the skin. And most of you guys have probably seen me do this before, but I want to review it for people who haven't seen how to do this. I'm going to zoom in a little bit first so we can take a closer look at our subject. And then I'm going to go straight to the Portrait Enhance category. And I'm going to use the Auto Skin Smoother. That's the fourth tool down. And I use this one so much, I'm actually going to mark it as a favorite so I can find it over and over again. Here's how you make an effect, a favorite. At the end of the results column, up at the top, you'll see there's a little favorite flag. This is actually a little column right here along the right-hand edge. And if you click right in that column, right there, it'll actually turn on a little orange flag. That now makes that one of my favorite effects. You can find those favorite effects two different ways. Whenever you're browsing through a category, you can just enable the favorite flag at the top, and it only shows you your favorites, filtering out the stuff that you're not interested in. Or if you use the mini library over here on the right, I'm just going to roll that down. The first category is called Favorite Effects, and all of the effects that you've marked as a favorite will appear there together in one category. So you can work with the main library closed if you know which effects you'd like to use. All right, so we're going to use that Auto Skin Smoother. It has options for light, medium, and dark skin. I'm just going to grab the middle option and click on Add to Stack. The Auto Skin Smoother is going to go, it's going to find all the skin in the scene, and it's going to smooth it out all in one step. Let me turn that on and off so you guys can see what it did there. There is before, and there's after. Now you got to remember, this was a really cold day, so there's a little bit of pink in Whitney's cheeks, and you start to see some of the blood vessels come to the surface. It was cold. Plus, she's pregnant and just hiked out to this lake to be able to take these pictures. So using that little bit of skin smoother is going to smooth out. Is going to smooth that out a little bit and give a nice, rich glow to the skin. Now you can control how strong it is by using the fade slider right here. So if I'm bringing the fade slider down to a small amount, like 20, you can see it's a very subtle effect. And if I was to bring it up to something strong, like 70, it's a very strong effect. Typically, all of the effects in Photo Tools come in at a really strong setting. That doesn't mean you should use it at that setting. It's designed so that when you add it, you can see what it does. But typically, you want to use it at like half of whatever it comes in at. So what I like to do with the Skin Smoother is I'll actually start all the way down here at 0, and I'm just going to slowly bring it up until it looks good to me.
You have to be careful. If you get too far, you look like a China doll, and depending on style, I don't know.
Yep, and it really depends on your retouching style, and it's good to communicate with your clients. I mean, obviously, if all of your work is retouched the same amount, your clients are going to understand the amount of retouching that you do. But if you're not consistent on that, if you haven't developed your own style in terms of the way you retouch, it's very good to talk to your clients and kind of get a feeling for what they're interested in, because some people are going to want a more natural, fresh retouch. Some people are going to want a heavier retouch. It's just going to depend. So what I'll do is I'll bring that fade slider up until it looks good to me, and then I'll back it off about 10, because I always end up overdoing it. So, for Whitney, we could probably get away with only about 30, just enough to take the edge off the skin. There we go. It's kind of like adding some skin powder. All right, there's step one. Step two is to go in and look for any smaller point blemishes that we want to get rid of. And we're going to use another tool in that same portrait category called model skin. Model skin is like a heavier version of the auto skin smoother, but it only works where you paint it in at. So rather than applying to the whole image, it's just going to load up into my brush, my pen that I'm using right here. And I happen to be using a Wacom pressure sensitive tablet, so I'm just going to turn on the pressure sensitivity. That means the harder I press with my tablet, the quicker it's going to paint that effect in. Now, you don't have to use a tablet, but I find it a really handy tool for applying effects. Let's zoom in here a little bit and look for anything we want to clean up.
Now, y'all know I went through and retouched this before Dan put this on the web, right? Just kidding.
So I'm going to go through and I'm just going to soften up some of those wrinkles in the brow. It was even though it was an overcast day, it's still fairly bright outside, especially with that silver reflector in front. So it makes you squint at your forehead a little bit. So we're just going to smooth those wrinkles down just a little bit. I'm going to smooth out that little scar between her eyes. My wife's going to kill me when I get home for retouching her in public. Let's soften up those eye bags just a little bit. She actually never has eye bags.
I will soon.
And pretty soon, maybe just a little bit here, there in the crease of the nose. A little on the chin. There we go. We don't want to go too overboard. And you want to be careful if you over retouch, you also lose a lot of your lighting quality. So you lose any depth, any wraparound quality to the light, and the face just becomes very flat. We don't want to do that. So let me just zoom out one step and let's take a look at what we've done here so far on her face. I'm just going to toggle all of the effects on and off of that preview toggle. See, there's before, there's after. There we go. So smoothing that out a little bit. The lips look great as they are. I don't think I'm really going to change anything. I will brighten the eyes just a little bit. I'm going to do this a little bit differently than what you've probably seen before. Usually when I work on eyes, I'll use the Magic Eye Fixer, which also lives down here under Portrait Enhance. And it does a good job, except when you get really big veins in the eyes. So I'm actually going to use a different tool. I'm going to go to Basic Brushes, and I'm going to use one in here called Brush Less Color. And we're going to use that on the whites of the eyes instead. That way we can minimize those blood vessels a little bit more. Now this isn't going to remove them, it's just going to pull the color out of them so they become less obvious. And when a lot of times when you use the brush in effects, anything that has a brush next to it as a paint in effect, you want to turn the fade up really high while you're brushing so that it's obvious where it's working, and then we'll adjust its strength afterwards. That's the cool thing about it. So you can see I'm brushing this in on the whites of the eyes. It's turning them completely grayscale or completely monochromatic. We don't want to do that. That's going to look kind of creepy if we would leave it this way, but this just lets us see where we're brushing very easily. The other thing that you can do to help you see where you brush is to look at the mask. And you can always see your brush mask, and if you're using the focus bug, the mask from the focus bug by clicking on the Show Mask button, which lets you see where you've painted. It lets you see if there's any flaws in your mask. Like I can see, oh, there's a couple little spots in there that I didn't paint in as much as I did the others, like that. All right, so now, once I get those areas painted in, now we can adjust their overall strength using the fade slider. And I'd like to do this when I can see the entire face, because you need the context of the whole face to make the adjustment. So let's zoom back out. Let's bring that fade slider down, and I'm just going to slowly bring it up until it just takes some of the color out of the whites of the eyes. Probably in that 30 to 40% range is all we need. Let me just turn that one effect on and off so you can see before and after. Just have to clean those up a little bit. All right, one more step on the eyes. I'm going to use the Brush More Dynamic Range tool. You notice it's got a little favorite next to it. It's one of my favorites as well. This is like painting in an HDR look. It's going to increase the color and the contrast wherever we paint. And I find it's a great tool for the irises in eyes. So I'm just going to see if I paint there, it makes them a little, just pops those irises out, brings up the beautiful brown eyes. There we go. I'm just going to use it like an eyeliner just a little bit along the top of the eye, maybe on the eyelashes, just to make those pop out just a little bit more. There we go. Let's turn that on and off. Before, after. You can see it's a very subtle effect. That fade slider I can control to make it even stronger if I want. There we go. Alrighty. So there in just a couple of steps we've done our basic facial retouch. We've started from there and gone to there. Now it's time to actually make this thing pop. So we talked about pushing the color difference in the scene, basically making the background warmer and leaving Whitney a little bit cooler, especially with that denim dress. And that's what we're going to do. And we're going to use two different tools to really bring up the background. We really are looking for that golden hour kind of look. Now, this was, again, a really nasty cloudy day. It doesn't look like it in this case, but we're going to make it look even warmer in the background and add even more sun into it. You can see there's just a little bit of open sky on her hair, and that's about it in terms of lighting behind her. So I'm going to use a tool. It actually lives in the Landscape and Enhance category called Sun Glow. This is one from Kevin Kubota, and I use it quite a bit. It actually brings up the luminance in the lights and brings a little bit more warmth to it. So there we go. That's with Sun Glow added. I can control how strong it is with that fade slider. I'm going to leave it at about 60. And now I'm going to paint that effect off of her. So I'm going to use the paintbrush tool. Let's make it a little bit bigger. Let's make sure the mode is set to paint out, because I like what it does to the background, but I don't really want it blowing out her face, and I don't really want it affecting the denim either. So now we'll just paint that effect off of her face so that the face goes back to a natural looking skin. I am going to leave it on the hair because you can see how it kind of brings up more detail and more color in the hair. I do like that. And let's get it off of the blue denim because we really want that blue to stay a nice crisp blue.
How are you changing your brush size, honey?
So I'm not actually, oh, sorry, I'm changing my brush size. I'm using a Wacom tablet, so it has a cool little dial on it, so I can just wiggle my finger left or right to change my brush size. But you can also use the bracket keys on your keyboard. So just like you would in Photoshop, you can use the left bracket key to make it smaller, the right bracket key to make it bigger. If you hold down the shift while you do the bracket, it'll change the feather. And you notice the brushes in Photo Tools and all the onOne products look a little different in Photoshop. It's actually two concentric circles. The inner circle is the hard edge of the brush. The outer circle is the soft edge of the brush. So that way you can tell when you're brushing when you're going to get the most opacity out of it. Let's see here. Did we get everything? Again, we can always take a look at that mask just to see what we've done. So yeah, I can see there's some stuff in there I didn't really do a very good job on. So we'll come back and clean up some of those spots.
Somebody's asking why that mask is actually gray and not black or white.
That is a good question. And it's actually, let me just check one thing real quick to make sure I haven't given the correct answer. It's also because my fade was already down to 60%. So that mask also works in combination with your fade slider. So if I have a low fade, it's already going to be fairly dark because we're actually hiding most of it already. If I bring it all the way to the top, then it'll be a normal black and white mask. All right, so we've added some sun back in there. Now let's add just a touch more warmth to it. I'm going to use an effect called the Golden Hour Enhancer, which, if I recall, lives under Stylized Effects. If you ever forget where an effect lives, you can always use the search field. It's very handy for that. There we go. Now, again, that's way too strong to start. We're going to dial that back to about half, and we're going to brush it off of Whitney again. I'm going to keep this off of most of her hair in this case because this really changes her hair color. She's not a redhead. All right, there we go. Let's take a look at the overall before and after. Here's where we started. That's the original out of the camera. And there's our results with a little bit of photo tools. We focused on retouching the face, so we smoothed out the face, added a little bit of punch to the eyes, and then we really focused on pushing the difference between the foreground and the background, warming up the background, leaving Whitney in her normal skin color so that she really pops out from the background. All right. Any questions on this one before we move on
Uh,
to the next?
there's kind of a good one. Is there a way to copy the masks from one stack to another?
That is a great question. I really wish there was. It's on my list for the future to add to the product.
Okay. So far, so good.
Okay, doke. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next one. The next one, we're actually going to use a fairly similar technique. We're going to obviously not do any face retouching on this one because it's just her body. But one thing we didn't really talk about on the last one was pushing more of the difference in terms of the contrast or the detail. Your eye's going to go to those sharper spots in the image. So what we're going to do in this one is we're going to tweak the color a little bit, and we're going to really make the denim pop out. So to make the denim pop out, we're going to use, go to my category view to basic brushes. Again, the basic brushes is the very first category in Photo Tools. Some of the most common tools you'll use all the time, and they're loaded into brushes, so you just paint them where you want. So if you want to do burning or dodging or remove color or add contrast, locally, these are the best tools to use. So on almost every image, I'll end up using one or two of these basic brushes to do local tweaks. And I'm going to use that brush more dynamic range. I already showed you this one to do some eye retouching, but it's amazing what it does to denim. Watch this. I'm going to turn the strength up really high on this one so you can see how this works while I brush. And you can see how it just adds this cool, crispy, grungy feel to denim. Can also be good on hair if you're careful. There we go. I'm going to use this at a pretty high setting. Normally I wouldn't use it this high to start, but I'm going to add another effect over the top of it that's going to smooth it out a little bit. So I'm going to kind of overdo that brush more dynamic range. I'm going to keep it way up here at 100. And now we're going to add another effect, one from Kevin Kubota again, called Blue Dawn Leonidas. If you remember the movie 300, it had this really kind of cool, kind of this warm, cool dichotomy in the color, and it really kind of smoothed out a lot of the warm colors in images. There we go, something kind of like that. And now we're just going to brush that off of the dress a little bit. I'm not going to brush it off completely, so I'm going to bring my brush opacity down to about half, and we're just going to brush that through. This is going to bring back a little bit more of the original color in the denim and a little bit more of that more dynamic range effect underneath it, because I really want that warm versus cool to pop out. There we go, something like that. So again, warm versus cool is a classic way to build contrast in your image, visual contrast, and make the image pop out. The other thing is to look at the detail. In this case, we've got this very crisp blue versus this very soft warmth behind it. So it really makes her pop out even more. Let's take a look at the before and after so you can see what I mean. There's before, that's the original, and that's after. You can see how such a strong difference that makes before and after. And the cool thing about that was very fast. That was only two effects. I could even save that as a preset so I could use it over and over again. If you've never saved a preset in Photo Tools, go up to the File menu, select Save Preset, and just type in the name of the preset, pick a category that you want it to live in, type in other information about who created and what it does. You can even add keywords so it's easier to find. And then when you save that preset, it'll live down in your library in the Presets tab. There's those same preset folders, and any preset you created. You know, for example, I think there was probably one here that I think we were playing with yesterday. Right there, the preset for that effect, you can see before and after, just like that. All right, any questions out there?
No, everybody must be really listening because I'm keeping up on it this time.
Well, that or they're really bored, so. All righty.
And it is actually Dan. Somebody asked if it's Brian. Dan, I don't know if you told at the beginning that it's you.
Yep, it is me, Brian. I'm filling in for him today. He's, I think, got a show in Texas. All right, so on the next one, we're going to look for more of a vintage look. Kind of the 70s tattered print look is really popular with high school seniors, and it's also very popular in a lot of other type of work. We see it a lot in editorial and advertising work as well. And there's some cool ways that you can really age your prints here inside of Photo Tools. So here's our original out of the camera. Now, all of these images that we're showing here are all shot on a Canon 5D Mark II, and they're all shot with an 85 millimeter lens at 1.8 in aperture priority. So they have a fairly shallow depth of field already, but I want to enhance that even more. And normally I would go and do that inside of focal point, but I'm already in Photo Tools, so let me show you how you can reduce the depth of field inside of Photo Tools, especially if that's all you have. If we go to the categories view, and we move down to the edge treatments, there's a selective focus Gaussian and a selective focus radial. I'm going to pick the radial option. The other reason I like doing this in here is it's a little bit more of uh, a low quality blur, if that makes sense. Focal point is designed to simulate what a lens actually does, and that's a more of a modern, pure, lens you'd buy, an expensive lens. This is going to look more like a crappy plastic lens that you might have on an inexpensive disposable camera instead. So that's I'm going to use the selective focus radial option. I'm going to say add it to the edges. There we go. Let me just hide the library here so we can see that effect. And with that fade slider, I'm just going to bring that up and down so you can see what that does. You can see how that's adding kind of a more distorted, gnarly looking blur to the edges. Now, obviously, I don't want that on Whitney, so I'm just going to use the brush to paint that off. Here we go. Now, next step is to add that vintage color to it. And there's actually an effect called vintage, which is perfect for doing this. It's going to live in the film and darkroom category. I'm going to scroll down here to the V's. There's vintage. Again, you notice it's got a little mark next to it. It's one of my favorites. And this is one where you kind of want to think about what's going to look best in the image because there's a couple of different color options. There's a blue and a yellow light version. Let me turn on the split screen in the comparison you can see. There's a blue-yellow dark and a red-yellow. Now in this case, I think I like the red yellow. What red yellow does is it's basically a split tone. It's going to take the dark colors in the image and it's going to lighten them. So basically going to reduce the contrast and make those more red. And in the highlights, it's going to push the highlights down and make them more yellow. And I think it makes a nice low contrast vintage look when we do that. There we go. Now again, we'll control how strong it is with the fade slider. We don't want to use it at its full strength. Let's just kind of dial it in about halfway, just enough to kind of switch the color palette to make it look a little bit more vintage. It kind of removes it from the current modern day and makes it look a bit more old-fashioned. And then to finish this out, we're going to add a vignette and a paper texture over it. Just to add a vignette, we'll bring the library back up. I'm going to go down to our edge treatments. Down at the bottom, I'm going to add a dark edge vignette. Now, you can add a vignette that will automatically just stick to the edges. In this case, I want one that's a bit more of a custom shape. I really want to focus just on the area around Whitney. So I'm going to use the masking bug overlay option. This will actually add the effect and it uses the masking bug. If you've ever used focal point, it's the same little guy that lives here in the middle, and we can use it to control the size and the shape and the position and the strength of our vignette. You can actually use the masking bug on any effect that you want to apply it in more of a planar or a soft round effect. So I'm just going to position it over her, use the little legs, and I can pull and twist to set the area that I want to protect. Then using the right hand antenna, I can control how strong the effect is. The shorter the antenna, the softer the effect. The longer the antenna, the stronger the effect. The angle determines how quickly it transitions. So if I use a very low feather, you can see it creates a very hard artificial edge. We don't want to do that. That looks horrible. But if I bring it up and make it softer, maybe using something like a feather of 70, it becomes more natural. And of course, we don't want an amount that high. We only want an amount of about 40. There we go. Just enough to darken the outer edges. Let me turn it off. So there's before, there's after. Enough to darken the outer edges so that the biggest bright to dark contrast is in her face. That's where we want people to look, is right at the face. All right, the last step is to add kind of a tattered paper look. We want this to look like it was printed on an old piece of paper. We can do that in the overlay effects category. There's all of these ones that are start out image overlay. These are the cool ones. These let you add some great looking texture over the top of the image. The one I'm going to use is called the tattered paper gray. There's a blue option, which is going to cool the image off, and a red option that would warm the image up. I'm going to use the gray version. That way it doesn't change the color at all. And I can add it in a normal or a subtle or a lighter or a darker version. Let's try the normal version here.
Is this the one that's only in the newest version of Photo Tools?
This it is. The tattered paper is only in Photo Tools 2.6. So if you haven't downloaded that update, there's a good reason to do it. There's a bunch of new effects here inside of Photo Tools. Let's minimize that library. And with a fade slider, I can just dial in the strength of that effect. I'm going to use it all the way at the top in this case because I do want it to be pretty strong. And then we'll use the brush to paint it off of any spots on Whitney that we don't like. So like I don't really like them on her face as much. I'm just going to make sure her face stays clean. I'm going to leave it on the dress because we don't want it to look too artificial. We want it to look like those are natural. And if it was a natural cracks and decay, they would appear everywhere. But I can just minimize them where they're a little too strong. So I'm just going to reduce their strength on the skin so they don't become a distraction. And a couple other spots where we just don't want them to be quite as distracting. There we go. Something kind of like that. Let's take a look at before and after. Before, after. Just like that. A much more sellable image that's going to really pop off the page for your customers. All right. Any
Hey,
questions?
when you save this out of here,
Mhm.
it is a copy, but is it saving it as a PSD or is it saving as a JPEG or TIFF or do you have it set a certain way?
So it depends on how you access it. The way I'm accessing it today is through Lightroom, and I'm actually saying, Lightroom, send it straight to Photo Tools. And I get to pick the file format that it's going to save in that dialog, and I'll show you that here in just a second. If you open an image from Lightroom into Photoshop, it's typically going to save it as a Photoshop file, unless you actually, I think it's always going to save it as a Photoshop file. If you're working in something like Apple Aperture instead and using that as your host to send to Photoshop, it'll usually make a TIFF, but you can also tell it you want it to make a PSD instead in the Aperture preferences. The way you control the file format in the way that I'm working today, I'll show you right now on the next image here. All the images we've been working on so far have been color images from the same outdoor setting. We also went into the studio and did some. And I'll show you the image that we're going to work on. Now, this is the raw color image. Now, when I was shooting this, I knew I wasn't going to use it in color. I knew I wanted to go black and white with it, but shot it in color because it's shot in raw, and that lets me then make my own black and white adjustments when I get into the computer. Now, this is shot with our super duper Bliss light that we made. This is actually 5 18-inch fluorescent tubes that are just mounted on a wooden frame, and it gives this really cool ring light look. And I'll show you what these look like here in just a minute. So we were talking a minute ago about when we open that image up, how we control what the file type is. And you control the file type in the Photo Tools dialog that pops up here inside of Lightroom. Over on the right-hand side, I have the option to either work on the original, and I can do that as long as it's not a raw file. If I'm working on a raw file or another image where I want to make a copy of it, I select the second option. That's going to make a copy with the Lightroom adjustments applied. That's important. When you take an image out of Lightroom, if you don't apply the adjustments you made in Lightroom to it, it's going to look just like it did out of camera. So any color correction or tonal correction adjustments you did are going to be lost. So you want to make sure it's a copy with the Lightroom adjustments. Under File Format, I can pick the type. I tend to work with PSD. The nice thing about that is when it applies, the Photo Tools results go to their own layer. So I can always go back into Photoshop and throw that layer away or mask it in on my own or make any other changes I want. I can choose the color space, the bit depth, and if I have multiple versions of Photoshop, I can even pick which version of Photoshop I want to work with. Normally I would work in a 16-bit depth as well. So let's actually toggle that over to 16-bit. And I'm just going to hit open. So that's now going to take that raw file in Lightroom. It's going to make a 16-bit Photoshop file version of it. And then it's going to send that to Photoshop, which is then going to automatically send it to Photo Tools so I can start to work on it right away. So there we go. All right, this one's a vertical image, so let's change our preview to that side by side. That way we can see both of the images. And I'm going to bring up the library down here at the bottom. And the first thing I want to do is I know I wanted to convert this to black and white. So in order to do the black and white conversion, there's one effect that I really like from Kevin Kubota, but the problem with it is it's a little bit too strong. I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to go down here to black and white treatments. The one I love is this black and white Kev secret formula. It looks so much like what you would have created in the darkroom. It's not just a simple black and white conversion, but it actually adds a little bit of warmth and a little bit of grain and a little bit of glow into the highlights. The problem is it's too strong. It actually clogs up the shadows more than I want. So I'm losing the detail on the hair. It's a little more warmth than I want and a little more glow than I want. So if I use the fade slider to adjust it back, I start to get color back in there. I don't want color. I want it to be black and white, but I only want half of all the other stuff that it does. So let me show you how to fix that. This is something you'll do very commonly when you're working with black and white. The first thing I want to do is I want to convert it to a very general black and white, then add my black and white special effects on top of it. So I'm going to use one of the other black and white conversions first. I'm going to use convert to black and white filter option. And in the filter option, if you're an old school black and white photographer like me, you know that by applying different colored filters over your lens when you photograph will change the tonal relationships in the image. When I'm doing a portrait in black and white, using a green filter can be very helpful. It gives the most natural looking skin colors. So I'm going to select green filter and we'll add that to the stack here. There we go. Let's make that a fit so we can see. So that did a very natural looking black and white conversion. It's maintained the tonality of the original as close as possible. Now we can add that effect from Kevin without having too much strength to it. So we'll go back to the library here. We'll use that black and white Kevin secret formula option. We'll add that there. And now I can bring that fade back to where I want it. I only want about half of that. There we go. All right, that looks pretty good. But let's say I made a mistake. Let's say I forgot a step that I wanted to do. Or I get to a point and I realize, well, you know, I like this, but I really like the detail in the dress. I wish the detail in the dress popped up more. I bet if I use that brush more dynamic range tool, I can make that pop up more and the hair pop up more. But I want to do that before I did Kevin's effect. So watch, we just roll back. I just step back in the stack in time. I can now apply another effect in between. Let's go up to basic brushes. We'll use that brush more dynamic range tool that we've used a few times already. Again, this is probably my favorite tool. I use it all the time. Make my brush a little bit bigger here. And let's just paint that in. Now, this is going to look stronger than we actually want it to be, but keep in mind that that effect from Kevin tends to darken up the shadows a bit. So I'm okay if this actually lightens up in here temporarily because it's going to become darker in just a minute. And I also kind of want to lighten up the hair up there a little bit too. Make that hair pop out more. And let's zoom in. Let's make the eyes and the lips pop out a little bit more too.
Still doing pretty good. Does anybody have any questions? I'm staying further on top of this than I thought I would be.
There we go. We can control the overall strength with that fade slider of that effect. I'm going to crank it up here pretty high. And now we'll just turn that Kevin Secret formula back on top of it. There we go. That looks much better. Now we've really got that cool crispness in the texture and in the hair and in the eyes, but we kept the warmth. Now, if I made any mistakes, you notice I'm starting to get just a wee bit of a halo in on that edge of the belly and on the edge of the sleeve. I can just go back in time and I can brush those out as well. They weren't really as noticeable before because of the way Kevin's effect works. So to get rid of it, I'll just make sure my effect is set to paint out, grab my brush. Now I can just paint right along that edge to help remove any halo that I created. Just a little bit of a halo there. There we go. Now we'll turn that effect back on. There we go. Much better. Just like that. All right. Any questions out there?
Nope, doing good still. You can do another
No?
one if you want.
Those are the only ones that I picked out to do today. So I can take a few questions on any onOne topic if folks want.
Somebody's asking about programs I've never heard of, or Intuos 4 or I don't know what that is.
It's probably the type of tablet that I'm using. I'm using a Wacom Intuos 4. It's I think they call it a medium. It's about a 6x8 or 6x9 size. I find it the perfect size. I like it bigger than the smaller one because it actually has 8 buttons instead of 4 buttons on it, so you get all the buttons with it that you can have.
Somebody's asking about our light again, the why we have a
Ah,
pentagon shape.
let me show you kind of what that light looks like here. Oops, come back here.
We had a round one the first round that we made.
Well, it was actually a square one the first time we did it. It was 4 tubes, and it was a little bit too small to shoot through at times, and it created a pretty weird looking catch light because it was a square catch light. So we made it bigger, and with the size of tubes we have, this is about the biggest you can make and still be used in the studio for doing head and shoulder shots. Still get that kind of that ring light look. You get much bigger than this, it's just gonna act like a big softbox instead. So. All it really is are just fluorescent tubes, the kind that mount underneath a kitchen counter, kind of fluorescent lights, screwed onto a 2x2 wooden frame and stuck on top of a light stand. It's very basic. You can probably build it for less than $100, and it makes everybody look great. Not that
Yeah.
Whitney doesn't look great as she is, but
Thanks, honey. I use this light a lot for boudoir sessions. It's not as great for kids and babies. I don't like it as much as what it does to the skin, but for an adult or for a woman where you want the skin nice and smooth, this light works really good for that.
yeah. Alrighty.
Okay, now we have a bunch of questions. Are you browsing? Why tubes instead of a ring flash?
The tubes were cheaper and larger than a ring flash. The ring flash is very small and it's really just around the size of the lens, and it kind of creates more of a greasy on-camera flash kind of look, where this is a broader, softer light, and it doesn't require that it be a flash. One of the things that we found in the studio, especially with the newer cameras like the 5D Mark, is that we're not actually using our flashes as flash nearly as much, using the modeling lights, shooting wide open, and you get this much softer, more wraparound light quality than actually using as I think Whitney started doing this when she was doing some boudoir shooting. You know, woman standing there with no clothes on, she's already nervous as can be. The last thing you need are some big strobes firing off that make you even more nervous. But if you can just shoot in a very natural setting, just using the modeling lens at 800 ISO, you can make yourself more comfortable. You can see exactly what light quality you're going to get. It's going to look exactly like what you see. So, honey, do
Make
you have
sure
any comments on that?
make sure you're turning all of your lights off too. So if you have studio lighting on or any other kind of lights on, make sure that you are shutting them all off, or they will affect the light quality as well. Um, about how far away from the subject is usually about an arm's length, give or take. This one's a little bit bigger, so I can step back a little bit further. On the first one that we did, it was about an arm's length. If you get the subject too close to the light, things that stick out, such as your nose, will have a big white spot on the end. So you want to make sure that you're very careful about that. So you want them far enough away that that will be okay. A couple shots, couple trial and error with whatever light you create, you should be able to do it. I mean, a couple test shots and I've got it about where I want it. I do shoot it wide open 1.8. I use probably about 800 ISO depending, and then I just adjust till I get the look that I'm looking for.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Asking about, somebody asked this last time too about taking out the catch lights.
You could. I actually kind of like it. I think it's more of a stylized look having those catch lights in there, and you want to have a catch light of some kind in there. You don't want to remove it all together. It look very unnatural, and that's the hard thing about catch lights and eyes. Trying to retouch them uh, is it's hard to put them back in the right place to have them look realistic. It can become fake very quickly because we kind of understand when we look at eyes where those catch lights should fall, and they're different on each eye and they're different size on each eye. And if you go in and start to monkey with those, unless you're really good, you're asking for trouble, I think.
Change the subject a little bit. Aperture 3, Photo Tools working with Aperture 3 is the same as Lightroom?
Yep, works exactly the same way. Photo Tools does use Photoshop as its processing engine, so you need to have Photoshop installed to work with it. Most of our other tools, you don't actually even have to have Photoshop installed. If you're using Focal Point or Photo Frame or Photo Tune or Perfect Resize, you can use those on their own, either through Lightroom or through Aperture, or strictly on their own. You can just open up the application and use them. Of course, you can use them through Photoshop as well, but Photo Tools is still one of the few that actually requires Photoshop be installed.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm back on the light. They're mixed in here a little bit. The color balance on the tubes, I don't even remember. What did you buy?
Oh, this is funny. They're actually, I think they're grow light bulbs. They were on sale. Uh, 90% of the time when we use this light, we know it's going black and white, so I'm not that worried about what the color is going to look like. If it's a color shot and I know I'm going to be worried about it, I use a passport, color checker passport from X-Rite in shot to build a custom profile for it that accounts for the difference in the color temperature. It's actually a very pink, uh, lavenderish looking light on the skin. Which is weird because typically fluorescents are more of a green look. These are not. They're kind of the opposite. They're more of a magenta look.
And
So,
on the white balance, to be honest, I actually play with it. It depends on the look that I want. Again, it's just a couple little quick checks, and depending on the look that I'm going for, sometimes I like that purple look, and I'll add a vintage filter or something over top of it, and that's definitely what I want in the end. So it's fine. It may not look right in the camera, but I know what I'm going to do after the fact. But I do change my white balance.
you got to remember, like cooking, everybody has a different recipe, and as long as you like the end results, it doesn't really matter how you get there. So, alrighty. Sounds like that's probably it.